Imagine a single decision made in just 30 minutes that would tear a nation apart for over 70 years. Two superpowers drawing a line on a map, splitting families, friends, and lovers who would never see each other again. This is the shocking story of how Korea went from one unified country to two completely different worlds. And it all started with a line drawn at exactly 38 degrees north latitude. Today, you know South Korea for K-pop demon hunters, BTS, Samsung, and kimchi. North Korea, nuclear threats and total isolation. But these weren't always two separate countries. They were once one nation, one people, one culture. What happened to split them apart forever wasn't a civil war or internal conflict. It was something far more dramatic and unexpected. Let's rewind to 1910. Korea had been independent for centuries, but Japan had been eyeing this strategic peninsula like a hungry predator. When Korea's emperor desperately sent a secret emissary to an international peace conference, begging the world's superpowers to help save his country from Japanese invasion, the world turned its back. The call went unanswered. Japan seized Korea and began 35 years of brutal occupation. The Japanese didn't just occupy Korea. They tried to erase it completely. They forced Koreans to adopt Japanese names, worship at Japanese shrines, and banned the Korean language from schools. Korean history was deleted from textbooks. Thousands of Korean women were forced into sexual slavery as so-called comfort women for Japanese soldiers. Korean men were drafted into Japan's army or forced to work in mines and factories. It was cultural genocide in slow motion. But the Korean spirit refused to die. In 1919, when Korea's last emperor died, something extraordinary happened. On March 1st, millions of Koreans poured into the streets in peaceful protests, demanding independence. They read their Declaration of Independence aloud in Seoul's city center. Japan's response was swift and brutal. The military opened fire on peaceful protesters. Tens of thousands were arrested, killed or wounded. The streets ran red with blood. This massacre backfired spectacularly. Korean independence leaders fled to Shanghai, China, where they formed a government in exile. They elected Syngman Rhee as their president and spent decades fighting alongside the Allies, waiting for their moment of liberation. That moment finally came in 1945 when Japan surrendered, ending World War II. After 35 years of oppression, Koreans celebrated in the streets. They were finally free, or so they thought. What happened next would make the Japanese occupation look like a warm-up act for the real tragedy. Here's where our story takes its most dramatic turn. The United States and Soviet Union had just defeated Japan, but these two superpowers were already eyeing each other suspiciously. Korea was strategically located between China and Japan, making it incredibly valuable. Neither America nor Russia wanted the other to control the entire peninsula. On August 11, 1945, in a meeting room in Washington, D.C., American officials faced a crisis. Soviet troops were already entering Korea from the north and moving fast. If they didn't act quickly, Stalin would control the entire country. Two young American colonels, Dean Rusk and Charles Bonesteel, were given 30 minutes to find a solution. They grabbed a map and looked for a line that would split Korea roughly in half. They had no knowledge of Korean geography, culture, or politics. They simply found the 38th parallel, a line of latitude that ran across the peninsula, and drew it across the map with a pencil. In 30 minutes, they had divided a nation that had been unified for over 1,000 years. This wasn't supposed to be permanent. Both sides agreed it was just temporary, until they could figure out how to reunify Korea under a single democratic government. But as we now know, temporary became permanent. And that pencil line became one of the most militarized borders on Earth. The Soviets moved quickly in the north. They installed Kim Il-sung, a young Korean communist who had fought alongside Soviet forces. He arrived in Pyongyang dressed in a Soviet major's uniform and was hailed as a national hero. Within months, he had established total control with Moscow's backing. In the south, the Americans faced chaos. Multiple political parties emerged, all demanding immediate independence. The US military government refused to recognize any Korean authority, insisting they were the only legitimate government. When Koreans tried to form their own republic, American forces shut it down. The situation grew more tense by the day. In 1947, the United States proposed holding elections across all of Korea under UN supervision to reunify the country. The Soviets refused to allow UN observers into North Korea. Elections went ahead in the south only, and Syngman Rhee became president of the Republic of Korea in August 1948. Not to be outdone, Kim Il-sung held his own elections in the north and proclaimed a democratic People's Republic of Korea in September 1948. Now there were officially two Koreas, each claiming to be the only legitimate government of the entire peninsula. Both the United States and Soviet Union declared their respective Korean governments as the sole legal authority. The tragic irony is breathtaking. Korea had fought for independence from Japan for 35 years, only to be immediately divided by their liberators. Families were split overnight. Brothers found themselves on opposite sides of an arbitrary line. Lovers were separated by an invisible barrier that would become more impenetrable than any prison wall. The human cost was staggering. Millions of families were torn apart. People who had gone to visit relatives in the other zone found themselves trapped forever. Children were separated from parents, husbands from wives. The 38th parallel became a wound that would never heal. What makes this story even more heartbreaking is how different the two Koreas became. The South, despite starting under military rule, eventually embraced democracy and capitalism. It transformed from a war-torn agricultural country into a technological powerhouse. Today, South Korea is known worldwide for its innovations, entertainment, and vibrant culture. North Korea went the opposite direction. Kim Il-sung established a hereditary dictatorship that continues today under his grandson, Kim Jong-un. The country became increasingly isolated, developing nuclear weapons while its people suffered under one of the world's most repressive regimes. The contrast couldn't be starker. South Koreans enjoy freedom, prosperity, and global influence. North Koreans live under constant surveillance, with no access to the internet, foreign media, or the right to travel abroad. Same people, same culture, same history, but completely different destinies because of a line drawn by two American colonels in 30 minutes. Attempts at reunification have failed repeatedly. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 killed millions and ended in a stalemate. The two countries are technically still at war today, separated by the demilitarized zone, the most heavily fortified border in the world. Families separated 75 years ago have mostly died without ever seeing their loved ones again. This isn't just ancient history. In 2018, a remarkable moment occurred when North and South Korean leaders met at the border. For a brief instant, it seemed like reunification might be possible. The world watched as Kim Jong-un stepped into South Korea, the first North Korean leader ever to do so. Hope flickered that the peninsula might heal its decades-old wound. But that hope faded quickly. North Korea returned to isolation, continuing its nuclear program and rejecting further talks. The two Koreas remain as divided as ever, a living reminder of how quickly the world can change and how long the consequences can last. Today, over 75 million people live with the results of that 30-minute decision made in 1945. South Korea has become a global cultural superpower, while North Korea remains one of the world's most secretive and repressive states. The Korean Peninsula stands as perhaps history's starkest example of how arbitrary political decisions can shape millions of lives for generations. The story of Korea's division is ultimately a human tragedy wrapped in geopolitical drama. It shows us how quickly freedom can be lost, how easily nations can be torn apart, and how long the wounds of division can last. It's a reminder that behind every line on a map are real people, real families, and real heartbreak that can last for generations. If this story of division and heartbreak moved you, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments. What other split nations should we explore?